to discuss, but I want to just kind of get your thoughts on it. Our goal is to try and do some sort of community service with it, get people to think about things they had not thought about. We went to Prescott House and showed this to them, to the forensic interviewers, and they thought it was really significant to get this advice from these people. But from you guys, I want to know, what do you think about that?
About what?
Getting the advice that we sought from
the
sex
actual
offenders themselves.
I personally think it was very accurate. Just like I spoke to you previously, we grew up in an era of don't take candy from strangers, and it's not the strangers that are molesting our children. It is those people that we have to trust on a daily basis.
That's what we were talking about earlier. It's the family members. It's the ones that it's not the guy in a trench coat in a park. It's going to be the person who's got all the community ties. The molester's going to be someone that the family member knows. It's going to be someone that's active in the church more likely than not.
Yeah.
It's going to be someone that's active in the community, active in volunteer groups. It's the ones that have that community involvement where people would think, oh, that person would never molest a child.
They're so
But they're
good
the
with
ones.
children.
Yeah.
And then there are some of those predators that, like my situation, that specifically seek out women with children who are, as I was telling them, you know, my mom had just died and I was probably more vulnerable than I thought, but I always asked, and even to this day, what did I miss? Did I miss something? Did I overlook something? And I don't think I did. I asked everybody that was around, but I mean, child predators are just that. They're predators, and they are very good at what they do. And I don't think they're the strangers. I think the rapists would be the strangers, but the child predators are the people in our own homes and in our communities and in our schools.
The guy who talked about the sex offender registry, I thought that was profound, because I think often as parents we think, well, we know where the sex offenders are in our community. The point that he made that, well, before they get caught, they're not on a registry.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You have to figure out ways
Gotta have
to
history
identify these people. Would you say that a lot of times when they have gotten caught, that that wasn't the first time they have been doing this, or it may have been
Sure.
one child, or it could have
Yes.
been a series of children?
And
Yeah.
it's just like a criminal. He doesn't get caught his first time. There's multiple victims. And as far as the registry goes, you know, we were discussing that, and I think it serves two purposes. One, it puts that individual out there to educate the community, to hopefully prevent a future victim. And then secondly, it gives family members an opportunity to talk to their children and educate them on sexual abuse openly, discuss it, and prevent it from happening to their child. You know, explaining to them, hey, this is what you do when you have a situation where you feel uncomfortable.
And we need to teach more people how to use the registry, and that they need to really be registered for. I mean, that they need to get the hits. A lot of people enough people don't get them. You know, we're a reactionary society. We're always reacting to a story, and then they say, oh yeah, okay, and then everybody wants to look at it. And then as soon as it's in the rearview mirror, nobody's paying attention to it. But children need to know how to access this, because they are seeing people on a regular basis and they don't know who they're seeing. They might be able to come across somebody who's on the sex offender registry and not even, the parents haven't noticed it, but the kids, you know, they're always on social media. Do we have something that's constantly in their faces, educating them as to how to save themselves?
Do you find that this is a subject that people just would rather not think about?
Yes.
I mean,
It's very uncomfortable. It makes people very uncomfortable, especially when you know that most of the predators are family, friends, or neighbors, and they're people that you trusted with your child. And so you have your own feelings of guilt of, I thought this person was a good person for my kid to be around. They're this, this, and this. Like you said, pillars in the community. They're involved in volunteerism. They're involved in the church. They're going to gain access to children however they can. That's their MO. They want to get around children to carry out their crime. And they take a period of time to build the trust with the child. It's not like they just come to the child and abuse them. They usually build up a relationship. I've heard other interviews of people that have been victims, and they talk about this grooming period and getting the child to gain confidence in the predator and building that trust. And again, that's where we were talking after the segment, that's what gets to be so damaging for children is they don't know who to turn to, because you trusted them with this person or persons, and yet they're supposed to trust you, and now they're stuck because the predator is telling them things like, well, you can't tell mommy about this, or this is our little secret, or we're not going to talk about this because then you'll get in trouble and things are going to happen to you, or I'm going to do this. They threaten their pets. If they have a pet, they'll say, well, I'm going to take your pet away from you, or I'm going to harm your pet if you say anything. You're dead if you talk to anybody about this. So now the child is torn between, I'm no longer comfortable with this relationship, but my trusted parents usually don't know that this person is doing these things to me, and they're telling me not to talk to anyone, and I don't know who to turn to. And that leads to acting out behaviors.
That's right.
And that's where some of this starts to come to light. I was reading over this information here before I came here tonight about Stop It Now, and that's how often this is uncovered, is because the child's behavior starts to become erratic. They start to not care about themselves, or they become overly sexually promiscuous their own self.
That's
And
right.
that's when, and that's been sometimes years later after the abuse. And a lot of times I've heard too that kids will try to tell someone, a trusted adult, and they'll dismiss it like, Uncle Johnny would never do that.
Well,
or,
this was
Preacher Sam wouldn't do that to you. You might, I think you're confused.
What we learned at Prescott was that the offender, especially if it's a situation where it's a single mom, they will kind of prime the mom. If they've done something and they feel like the child is going to go say something to the mom, they'll tell her in advance,
Yeah.
so that when the child does approach her, she's like, oh, I already know about that. It was no big thing. You're making a big
Right.
deal out of something
Right.
that was nothing.
Yes.
They're
that has
very
happened.
conniving.
Very good
Very
manipulators.
Very,
conniving.
very, very good. And as a parent and as somebody that this has happened to, there's a lot of guilt and there's a lot of shame that this is the work that I do, human trafficking and all kinds, and people look, and you mean she didn't know? Well, people tend to, a lot of times people don't want to say that it's happening in their houses. They don't want to talk about what has happened to them, because people will cast a veil of shame upon the parent, and they don't want to believe it. A lot of times people say, well, financially, the child molester in my life, he made the most money, but the thought that he really believed that I wouldn't do anything about it. We were talking about it. He really believed that I was going to be okay with this. And a lot of times, mothers, single moms, they don't tell because of the shame. They're not able to take care of the children, and they don't want people looking at them, and they just want to dismiss it. But I just have to tell people, that's the worst thing that you could ever do. Because what the child molester, and that's what I call him all the time, I don't ever call him by his name anymore. What the child molester did to me and my children has affected us for the rest of our lives. And no prison sentence for him will ever be good enough, because the sentence that we serve will be for life, no matter what it is.
Something that I have found curious, in Alabama, there's no sort of treatment for these people.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder, the sheriff said the other day, on the recidivism rate with this crime, it's more than any other crime, that when they come out, they are more likely to reoffend. But when they're in our prisons, they're not screened, and they're not getting any sort of rehab. And I wonder why that is, and if that's something that should change. Other states have it. The Federal Bureau of Prisons has it in all of their facilities.
Mm-hmm.
So the way I look at it is, it's a sexual preference, and how do you change that? The only thing that you can do, I don't think you can change their sexual preference. Because if they've got a sexual preference towards small children, they're always going to have that. And I don't know how you teach a sex offender abstinence from that.
Is that the predators, is that all of them, like for Jefferson County, where half of them have molested a child who's under 12 or 15? This would just be preference for these people?
That's,
Yes.
yeah, that's the definition
It's
of a
the
pedophile.
prefer- yeah,
It's
it's the
their
definition.
preference for prepubescent
Breasted children.
Absolutely.
And some of them have a preference for girls, some of them have a preference for boys, some of them have a preference for just small children. The children can't be older than 7 because they become
But-
too old.
So these people, how do we identify those people in our community then? So this is the part that's gotten to me when we try to say, well, how do we really go forward from here? How do we really protect our children?
I think it's educating our children.
Mm-hmm.
I think that is the first step,
And our
whether it's
public.
having it in the schools, openly talking about it within the school, within the churches, within the community. I absolutely believe that it should be educating our children.
And I'm sorry, go ahead.
We do that in the Catholic Church. I'm a member of a Catholic church and I'm a volunteer. I teach children, and every year we are required to teach the children. We have a special curriculum that we have to teach children about safe interaction with adults and what do you do in the event that you don't feel comfortable around adults. And we do this every year with every class, and the parents are sent a letter ahead of time saying this is going to be taught to your children. We have to take attendance. We'll take attendance every class, but on that particular day when that class is being instructed, anyone that missed that class, they're sent the materials home. So, I mean, they take it very seriously. We've been doing this I've been teaching for 10 years now. We do this every year. It's age appropriate. You know, it's different for the older kids than it is for the younger kids. But it's basically doing that. It's empowering the children to start learning. You have your space, and that's one of the things I talk about here. You have your private space, and you have your private body parts. And those are not to be just taken lightly. And if people are trying to tickle you or hug you that makes you feel uncomfortable or, you know, tell you little secrets and things, then you need to go and tell a trusted adult. And I think that's what you have to do, is empower the kids that if you're feeling uncomfortable, there's probably a good reason and you need to tell someone. But I think the other thing, too, is to educate parents to say, if your child comes forward or starts to resist being around a certain person, you need to really think about that, because they're trying to tell you something that's uncomfortable for them to talk about. And when you don't believe them, or like you said, you dismiss it, you're making them be even more vulnerable and even more of a victim, because now they can't even, you won't even believe them.
That's right. Yeah, and you have to believe the children.
And that's what one of the sex offenders said. And it was interesting because I thought his advice, he was the one who had been a victim, he said. And his advice, I saw some of his advice on other websites on this is what you should do. Believe them, start the investigation, let them know they're safe with you, let them know
Yes.
they can come to you.
Yeah.
I thought, wow.
And a lot of people don't. New Jersey is probably one of the few states, and we had talked about this, we have a prison just for sex offenders called the Avenel Diagnostic Treatment Center. And it is a lockdown facility. There's no one in there except sex offenders, because we have a large number of sex offenders in the state of New Jersey. It is a treatment facility. They are required to do so much therapy. They are required to admit their guilt, and they have a whole battery of tests that came from Megan's Law, because that's where Megan's Law came from, is New Jersey. And they tier them. And my child predator is on the highest tier. They don't think that he will ever be well, if that's what you want to call it, to come out. But he will also, when and if he gets paroled, see, they do it a little different, that the New Jersey Attorney General's office, he will fall under that parole and not local parole, based on his tiering. And they can keep them. If they think they're predators, they can keep them.
One of the gentlemen in our story only served 2 years, and he was 25 years old when he committed the crime against his 11-year-old relative.
Alabama's a little bit different. We don't tier sex offenders. All of the sex offenders, the adult sex offenders, are required to register for life. So where other states tier sex offenders and they may roll off the registry in 15 years or 10 years, all of Alabama adult sex offenders have to register for life.
Yeah, and all of New Jersey sex offenders, they're registered for life. They're just tiered as to who will have jurisdiction for their parole and whether they are going to get out, because some of them get out of the prison and then go into a live release work with a psychiatric facility. I think that's how.
Well, because at some point, these people are getting out of prison and they are living in our neighborhoods and living around our children. So, education is big. Parents and children.
Mm-hmm. And the awareness, like what you're doing through this segment, raising awareness. And again, like you asked earlier, people don't want to talk about this because it's an uncomfortable subject. And again, there's a lot of, shame and guilt and, we just don't want to talk about those things. But the only way you're going to resolve it is by helping people feel comfortable to talk about it. And the more you can provide coverage on it, I think you can start saying, oh, there's that story, we need to talk about that. Like you said, too, you've got to, maybe the sex offender registry is a way to talk about it. I remember years ago, my sister sent me something that she had learned. She doesn't even live here, she lives in Georgia. And she said, you need to check the sex offender registry because there are sex offenders living right in Vestavia. And I went on the website with my daughters, and it was, like you said, it provides an opportunity to talk about it and to say, we need to be aware of this, because it may not be happening in your family, but your friends, they may learn of something. And I've even heard stories of that where a young girl was being abused by her father, and so was her brother, and she came to school one day and just could not take it anymore, and she confided in her friend, and the friend went and told the teacher, and the teacher told the principal, and that's how it came to light. But sometimes they may learn about it from their own friends. They go and spend the night. I'm always very leery of where are you going, who are they, do I know these people? Because again, it's gaining access to children, and if they're spend the night parties and stuff like that, and the child in the home is being abused, that perpetrator is not going to stop with their own child.
That's right. Sherry, this is the best possible story to educate the people. The fact that you did this and we're having this conversation is just the jump start of more conversations that we really need to have about. This is a crime that's kind of overlooked. You see the sheriff will come on and talk about, we're looking for a predator. People will watch that, and then you're in the courtroom and you're prosecuting somebody, and then you're at the schools and over child care resources, and then I'm in the community. But we only touch a small segment of people. With this segment, we can touch a lot of people and really jumpstart a conversation that we need to be having continuously, and not just for tonight. This, I think, as we roll into 2015, more and more, you need to stay on this story, educating the public, and we need to be mindful that you said the guy was 25 years old and the victim was 11. Well, we haven't really talked about, we kind of did, about the child predators who prey on, we have in family courts, they have cases where children are perping on other children. They've either been perped on, and I'm saying perp, and they've been abused by somebody else who may have been adults, and then they become the perpetrators of that particular crime.
And I did find in researching this story that Alabama does have a lot of treatment facilities for youth sex offenders.
For juvenile sex offenders. If you've got a juvenile that's adjudicated guilty of or adjudicated delinquent of a sex offense, they're required to get treatment from an approved DYS treatment provider. And that's mandatory, that they've got to get that treatment, and then they've got to get a risk assessment at the completion of their treatment.
And so will you speak about why that part is okay? Because as far as them and their preference and getting, getting better. The belief that they get better.
I think they've been victims, right? Usually they've been victims.
I would say that a lot of times when you've got juvenile offenders, it's kind of like she said, usually something has been done to them, or it's something that they've been exposed to.
Children, 26 before, I think you can change the mindset and the behavior of children more so than you can adults, potentially.
But something for the state of Alabama, obviously, this is something that in juvenile, it's not punitive, I guess. It's more of a rehab type of thing, the way they seem to look at it.
Okay, and I was going to say, they look at all the sex offender registry laws. They don't look at that as punitive. They look at it more as a regulatory. It's more for protection of the public. So none of our sex offender laws, the registry laws, the living restrictions for adults, none of that is part of their punishment.
For the youth.
For the youth or for the adults. The sex offender laws in themselves, the registry laws are not punishment. They're more of a regulatory scheme that we've got to protect the public. That's
So these guys feel that it's punishment to them. One of the guys that we talked to certainly.
Oh, I'm sure that
Right.
they
Yeah,
do.
I'm sure they do.
Well,
There
you
again,
know, wearing a scarlet letter.
exactly what the law states. It's called the Community Notification Act. And that is for us to notify the community of where these individuals live and for the community to act upon that knowledge and educate their children.
And Lieutenant Reach and I were talking about, you know, and we were just talking about several years ago that we did the sonar training when the new information came out for law enforcement, and I was there, and it was really to educate law enforcement and those that are working with predators and everything about what some of the new standards were, because we had new standards at the Adam Walsh stuff. On what we needed to do and what folks needed to be looking for, but training for law enforcement is great, but if we don't train the public, we are still lost. We're lost, and we got to do more.
Is there anything any of you want to add? I do appreciate all of you coming in and just kind of being a part of the further discussion and conversation. And we certainly plan to do some follow-up stories, to kind of let the community know what the experts have said, what people who are real stakeholders in this have said. But also to see, you know, what we can really do to either get that conversation, that education to the next level, so that we're making sure that all children are educated about predators, because they may be living in a home where there is a predator, and they may not feel that they have voice. So just to be able to figure out ways that we can make that type of difference in individual lives. So anybody, please add whatever you'd like to add.
I just want to say, Sherry, and I even told David when he called me, I mean, this is what I would say is truly investigative journalism. I mean, you all didn't just cover some recent crime and then just dismiss it and go on to the next thing. I mean, you all really took time. You really explored this. I mean, it's true investigative journalism. So you're not just hitting the highlights of the news. Oh, and today we had this again. You know, really trying to say this is a serious issue, and we want to help you, the public, and victims know what you can do to avoid these, because as they said, it's that opportunity. Well, let's reduce the opportunities. And the opening shots and the opening approach you had to the story, I thought was wonderful, about saying this is really robbing children of their innocence. You know, children are naturally trusting, and they naturally want to look to adults for friendship, relationship, and they naturally want to please adults. So they are doubly susceptible to these types of crimes.
Go ahead.
I'd just like to add that the one thing that the individual who was incarcerated for murder, when he said, you know, tell whoever you tell, let the investigative process take place, that applies for parents. If a child comes to you and tells you, look, give that opportunity, believe them, and let that investigation take place.
That's fair.
Yeah.
And
For
I
the
think
parent to see themselves as a part of.
the solution.
Yeah, I mean, you're
Absolutely.
the first step in the investigation, because you're the one who has to go tell.
That's right.
Just like Sunny was sharing with us, she could have easily just dismissed her daughter's case too, and then that child molester, who knows who he would have victimized next. You've got to stand up for your children and let them know you believe in them and you support them. You're going to help them through this very traumatic experience, because they are looking for you for help. They're looking to you for answers. And you've got to be brave enough to say, I'm not going to tolerate this, and I am going to pursue this to the fullest extent of the law. But I think also what Sunny shared too is she didn't ask her daughter about it and have her daughter repeat the whole scenarios over and over again. That can be just as damaging and humiliating, and that case I was talking about where the girl came to school one day and told her friend, and then the friend told the teacher. They made that child repeat the story over and over again. And I heard Judge Gaines say, you should never make the child repeat the story. You go straight to I don't know what the actual title,
The forensic child
Yeah.
interviewers,
don't
they're only
have
ones that
them
should be
retell the story to the
interviewed.
teacher, to the parent, to the principal.
Yes.
As soon as you become aware of it, you immediately get, authorities involved.
And that's why it's just wonderful that we have Prescott House in our community, that we have a place where
And-
children can safely tell
And we
a
have the
horrible
Clay
story.
House.
as
Yeah, we
well,
have the
and
Clay
the
House
as well.
Division.
in Bessemer.
And in St. Clair County, you have the
Yeah.
Children's Center, you have one in Blount County, you have a Children's Center, and you also have Oasis Women's Counseling too.
Yeah.
That can help. But that's the other thing I think is the next step to follow up to this story is to share what resources are out there
And
to
the
help
CHIPS
families.
clinic is very, very important in the work that they do for sex abuse and children. But I just want to add this, that as a single parent, as a single mother, and we have women who are predators too, so let's not forget that women are predators as well. But as a single mom, I just want to tell everybody that if your child says something happened, check it out. Don't just dismiss it. And there are predators who just really prey on single parents, who prey on that single mom and that vulnerability and the access to the children. And there's a lot of guilt and shame that can come with it. But at some point in time, you have to be stronger than the shame and guilt that's thrown upon you, and stand up for justice for your children and for yourself and for other children, no matter who they are.
I think to add to what Sunny said is, where to start is with parents having that open line of communication with their children. That parents need to have those conversations with their children and let their children know that no matter what anyone else says, that it's okay for them to come to them and tell them when they feel uncomfortable or when they think something has happened to them.
Well, thank you all so much.
Thank you, Sherry.
Thank you, Sherry.
We
You
appreciate
did
it.
such
We're
a
gonna-
great job.
We're gonna try to do more.
Good.
That was awesome.
Keep it up.
You
I
did
think
a
you did a
great,
fantastic
great job.
job. It
We
was-
love it.